So much to talk about. We brought you on specifically to discuss sort of what's happening blow by blow in our, with Congress and Trump coming to another deal yesterday to boost the economy. And also to talk about oil. What does it mean for us that oil has dropped below zero for the first time ever? But then I saw your most recent article out about, the maybe handful of things we should take away from the capitalist system and have a shared prosperity kind of system for it. Where I guess we'll just start with what's happening now, and if we could go to that at the end, that would be terrific.
All right, let me start with a caveat. I am not an alarmist, and I don't like it when I read or see people who tell me that the earth is falling apart and the sky is going to collapse and it's all over. So please keep in mind that's not my style. It's not what I do.
But you are about to do that.
Exactly. That's why
Okay.
I'm setting it up in order to be able to say something that I don't want to scare people at all. On the other hand, one of the reasons I would like to believe you bring me on is because I tell what I think is going on without the rose colored glasses and without the pretense. I think what you're seeing, and I imagine many of your viewers and the people you reach already half know this. You are watching panic. You you should not imagine that the theater that we have all this under control is anything other than the desperate behavior of people who precisely have nothing under control, are freaked out by that, which I understand, but instead being honest and sharing with us, oh my goodness, have we got a set of problems here? We are being told, oh no, nothing to worry about. The
Hmm.
same government that told us that the coronavirus was nothing to worry about, which acts every day as if the ecological and environmental problems with climate and global warming are nothing to worry about, and on and on. Anyone who believes them now really is not paying attention, which is the nicest way I can say it. When
Uh,
Trump
per-
when Trump and the Congress, as you mentioned yesterday, the day before, threw another several hundred billions of dollars, in this case for small businesses, because the amount of money they put aside 2 or 3 weeks ago has already run out, partly because it was much too small to begin with, and partly in the true American spirit, large numbers of big companies manipulated things to get their hands on some of that money, shrinking what actually went to small business. It's disgusting. But by the way, itself part of an out of control panic in which every company is wondering whether it will survive. And when companies face the situation, if I don't do the X, I may not survive, then the normal rules governing what they will do no longer apply. So things like stealing or lying or pretending or taking shortcuts that are dangerous, which the same companies would not do in normal circumstances, they're now doing. And unfortunately, that includes the political apparatus in this country, too. So the president acts like he has it under control. He doesn't. The president acts like he knows when we can reopen the economy. He doesn't. The leaders of the Democratic Party act as though what they're doing is a better solution than Mr. Trump's. It isn't. So what you have is a kind of chaos and panic. And the only consistent things are the attempt to throw unlimited amounts of money at everybody. So the Federal Reserve prints the money and throws it at it. You know how it's done, just for in case people are interested. Banks and other large corporations of various kinds can keep accounts at the Federal Reserve, money that they deposit in an account as if the Federal Reserve were like a bank. And all the Federal Reserve does is hit a button on a computer, and the balance in that account for, let's say, the ABC Bank is suddenly not $406 million, but $2,500,000,000. It's just a click of a computer button, the way you and I could do, and then off goes the bank, lending money, investing money, because it's all freebie, it's all chaos. The interest rate on that money is tiny, barely above zero, so it's costless for the bank to go in there and whatever they can get. Sort of think of it that way. If you do, and I'll stop in a minute, if you do, you'll also understand that the chaos at the top, a government that lost it when it came to this virus, didn't prepare for it, didn't cope with it, doesn't know what to do about it now either, can't. 1% of the American people have been tested as you and I are speaking.
Hmm.
The other 324 million, we don't know who has the disease, where they have it, how it developed. I mean, it is unspeakable the degree to which this system wasn't ready. But you're now beginning to see the panic seeping in everywhere else. Nowhere more obviously than in the oil industry.
Hmm.
The oil industry has got a problem. In the United States, an enormous new source of oil was discovered a few years ago, which you can get at by this horrible process called fracking, which we all know about. This meant the United States wanted to insert into the world oil economy a great new supply of oil. And if you insert oil into the economy with a lot of more oil, but no more demand, the price starts to go down. This is elementary economics. The rest of the world, guess what? Wasn't pleased. The countries that wanted to buy oil, they were pleased because the price was going down. But the countries that live off selling oil were pissed off, led by Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the other major, but those are the two biggest ones. They weren't happy. And a fight began between the United States on the one hand and Russia and Saudi Arabia. Quite a dance of those three as they tried to manipulate oil. Americans should be outraged. Three leaders, three people, Putin, Trump, and the fellow there who liked to butcher journalists in Saudi
Oh
Arabia.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, we all block his name for good reasons. These three men sit around controlling the energy that the world depends on. If you ever wanted a criticism of capitalism, there it is.
Hmm.
7.5 billion people relying on oil to move the vehicle, to heat the home, to produce the plastic, to produce the fertilizers that we all depend on. Three men determine what we pay for that. I mean, this is worse than the worst pharaoh of ancient Egypt in terms of the mockery of democracy. But here comes the big joke. They all got together and didn't understand that the pandemic around Corona would shut down the industries of the world and the demand for oil would disappear.
Hmm.
And so that's what happened. Over the last few weeks, the demand for oil went to nothing.
Boy, they must be really mad now.
Yes, they're all crazed. No one knows what to do. All the normal places where you store oil are full because they can't sell it. All the people who sell
Could
it,
they just stop pulling it up?
yes, that's what they're next going to have to do. But that terrifies them because most of them are deeply in debt, these oil companies. They borrow money like crazy. They're not going to be able to pay the money back because they can't give the oil away. Some of them are willing to pay you to take the oil. In other words, don't give me,
Wow.
just because they need to unload this stuff, the panic and the craziness. That's what people have to understand. It's not just that you're going crazy, cooped up in your apartment. It's that the whole system is falling apart. And here's where Chicken Little comes in. I'm not the person who says it's all falling apart, but unfortunately, if you ask me, capitalism has hit a stone wall. It doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know how to get out of it. It is throwing money at everything without asking the obvious question, what are the longer term effects of cooping people up in their apartments, of collapsing the oil market, of shutting down half the cities in the country, etc. And I wish I could tell you that Mr. Trump knows what he's doing, but nothing is more obvious than the fact that he doesn't.
Professor Wolff, couldn't it be a boon for environmentalists and the environment that oil production is slowing? I mean, we weren't going to get them to voluntarily turn it off, but now they're forced into it.
Yes, in the short run, that's already happening. There are wonderful photographs of cities in China and all over the world that used to be all foggy, with pollution, and you couldn't see a quarter of a mile down the road. And now, clear skies, people are enjoying the sun they never saw
I mean, just
before.
walking out of New York when I walk outside in New York City, you can see a palpable difference in the light. You can see the sunlight for
Exactly,
the first
exactly.
time in my
So
life.
here's in the short run, that's a definite positive, and people are noticing it. But here's the problem again, and I hate to beat the proverbial dead horse, but the problem is capitalism. If the price of oil now goes way down, as it has already done, into the $20, more or less, $20 to $30 a barrel, if it comes back to that, that's still a very low level. It's going to take a good long while for industries to ramp up again. We don't know if another wave of this corona is coming down the pike, and we don't know when it will hit or whether it'll be lighter or heavier in its impact. Who knows? But if the price of oil stays down, it's going to be very tempting for capitalists who use energy to use even more oil than they used to, starting as soon as they can, because it's cheaper than it was before. And,
Oh,
and since they're driven by profit, the cheapest source of energy is the one they will go with. They will be no more concerned about the ecological damage then than they have been in the last, century.
well,
So
that doesn't make me feel good, Professor Wolff.
no,
I'm not going to lie.
well,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be profit that determines this.
Mhm.
Profit is not as important as the survival of our planet, just like profit wasn't as important as getting ready for the next virus that can come to us. But a profit system puts profits first. That's what capitalism is and does. And if you don't want that, if you want public health to be more important, if you want a global ecological sanity to be more important, then your problem is a system that doesn't agree with you. And you have to act out what the implications of that are.
Professor Wolff, we have questions coming in from our
Please.
chat. I think it's from Eric Parsons on Facebook. We have Professor Wolff, I'm interested in your view of the geopolitical repercussions of the oil crash, given that the Middle East may be the only area that can still pump oil at a profit. And then, especially in light of your recent lecture mentioning that the US empire, as an extension of the British Empire, was collapsing before this.
Yeah, I think you're going to see unspeakable changes in the world, not just in the Middle East, but in all the different places that both produce oil and depend on that. And that is not just several countries in the Middle East, that is Russia. Russia's economy is extremely dependent on the global market for oil and gas. So is Nigeria, the biggest economy in sub-Saharan Africa. So is Venezuela. In many ways, so is Mexico. And so is the United States. I mean, let me use the American example. If oil stays at a price somewhere in the $20 a barrel, or what I'm about to say, it's even worse if it's below that, you're going to see a major additional collapse in the American economy, if you can actually imagine it. And here's why. The oil companies that zoomed into the middle of the United States, from Canada in the north down through the middle of the US to Texas in the south, and they did the fracking, and they're doing it now, drilling oil wherever they could find it, no matter what the ecological damage they were doing, no matter the offense they were giving to the burial grounds of Native American tribes, all of which, folks know. Those companies did not use their own money. What they did is they went to the banks of America, particularly many of the bigger banks, and they pitched them and they said, look, the world is paying $80 to $100 a barrel for oil. We're going to be able to bring it out of the ground for 40 or 50 or 60 bucks. And look, we're going to be making $20, $30 a profit, dollars per barrel. It's a no lose situation. We're going to make a fortune. You can get in on it by lending us the money. We'll borrow from you. We'll pay you a better interest rate you can get elsewhere. So the deal was done. But the problem is now a huge part of America's economy, oil, is in the hands of wildcatting kind of companies that go in there who have hooked the banks of America into it. If they can't sell the oil, which they can't, at a price that's profitable, which they can't, then the loans they owe to the banks are loans which they can't repay, which means as they go down, they take the banking system of the United States down with it. And when is it happening? In the middle of a viral pandemic and a general collapse of the economy. When I
Whew.
tell you it's falling apart, you get the picture now.
Yeah. Switching topics a bit, we have a question from T Lurker in our Twitch chat. How would worker cooperatives in healthcare in your model handle this crisis differently than the current establishment? And how would they function in a pandemic without central coordination from a government or international bodies like the WHO?
Well, I mean, those are two different questions. Let me answer the first one and why worker co ops would be different. The whole point of a capitalist enterprise begins with the reality that you have two different groups of people involved. One are the owners and their chief executives, the people who run the company. They're there to make profit. They spend money in order to pull more money out of the operation than they put into it at the beginning. That's the point and purpose of business. They all go to business school, they all get MBAs, and that's what they learn how to do. And if they do it, they get promoted and move up. And if they fail to do it, they get fired and move down. That's their life. For the majority of us, that's not our business. We come to work 9 to 5, go where we're told to go, sit where we're told to sit, do what we're told to do. And at the end of the day, we go home leaving behind whatever it is we help to produce. So there's two groups of people. One we know as the employer, and their game is profit. And one is known as the employee, and their game, to be blunt, is to do the least strenuous work for the most possible wage or salary. In that situation, which is what every capitalist will tell you, the bottom line is profit. That's what they're there for. A worker co op isn't like that. A worker co op is a situation in which the employees are also at the same time the employer. When you're negotiating with the boss, you're negotiating with yourself. And your goal is to do what's best for the community of workers, all of whom has one person, one vote to decide what the company makes, how it does it, where it does it, and what it's going to do with the proceeds. So for those people, it really doesn't matter whether you're more or less profitable because they're all going to share that anyway. And they have other concerns. For example, they don't want to get sick. If they do get sick, they want an appropriate mechanism. So of course, they're either going to store masks and gloves and all that other crap, or they're going to make sure someone in their environment has that stockpile so that they, their objectives are not reducible to profit. They would like to be profitable, sure. It's always better to make more money than it costs you to produce whatever you're producing. They will be interested in profit, but it will not be the bottom line because they have other concerns that are just as important. They want to have a daycare center there so that parents can come and have a safe place for their child to get a good a
Care
daycare.
and education, sure.
Yeah, all of that. That's important. They're going to do that. They're going to spend money on that because that's for them. Capitalists manage to maximize the profit because they're the only ones who get that. You don't get that. That's not yours. You
Mhm.
get a wage. They get the profit. So the whole world will change because profit will only become one of a whole host of objectives that every business will be focused on. So
S-
that's
s-
a crucial difference, and therefore they won't take the absurd steps. Let me give you a simple example that's very old. A profit-making company will deploy a machine that spews horrible crap into the air. All right. In the neighborhood, children breathe that air. They get sick. They get asthma, as you mentioned. They get all the things we know happen. Well, the company says, "I'm sorry, we have to do that because that maximizes our profit." No, say the workers. Yes, I mean it's good for your profit, but it's killing us, and we're having to go for medical treatment, and it's expensive. But that's an impossible conversation. That goes nowhere because those workers don't make the decision. The only thing those workers can do is quit, leave that job, go somewhere else where they risk exactly the same thing happening to them. A worker co-op doesn't think like that because they're just as concerned about the health of their family as they are about profit. And so a wholly different set of decisions are going to be made when each of the problems of the enterprise come up. That's the best hope we have to have a better prepared society for viruses, for ecological damage, and so on.
Professor Wolff, is from history or even just from your thoughts, because there is such a progressive movement. There was Bernie, there was so many supporters for Bernie. People are starting to think differently in our country. Do you believe it's possible? I am giving you a question from La Femme Fatale from our Twitch chat, but in kind of in my own words. Do you think it is possible that due to where we are right now with the progressive movement or the left movement in the US gaining some power, do you think it's possible that there is a silver lining to this pandemic, that we can have a more socialist style of economy for the US and world coming out of it? And what would the steps be that we can take to get there at this point?
Okay, my answer is yes. I do think there is that silver lining. I
Thank
do
God, because if you
I
had
do
said
think,
no.
yeah, I do think that is happening. And of course, I am very pleased and happy that it is. As to what we can do, again, my apologies for stressing this, but it is what seems to me to be the next big step. We have to stop being afraid, as so much of the progressive part of this country has been, to say out loud that it's not just the horror of neglecting our environment, and it's not just the horror of inequality. All of those things are true, and all of those things are important to say. But we have to be no longer afraid, and that's what I think it was, to say, look, this system doesn't work anymore. Bite the bullet, face the reality that we are caught in a system called capitalism, which organizes every factory, every store, every office with a tiny number of people at the top, the owner, the boss, the board of directors, whatever you call them, who tell the rest of us what to do. That system has now broken down. It had a nice run, 3 or 4 centuries.
Nice run,
It
yeah.
accomplished a lot. I don't want to take away from it, particularly technologically. It did advance us. We can now fly in airplanes and all kinds of, I get that. But like everything else, it had its run. It was a system that got born. It is a system that evolved and progressed over time. And now the next act in this drama is called death. It dies. Like slavery died, like feudalism died, capitalism, we all knew really would eventually. the sad reality, but also the liberating reality is it's coming sooner than we might have thought.
I remember you and I having conversations. They're on YouTube, right around Occupy Wall Street, and you used the very famous quote about how, sometimes all of a sudden decades happen in a blink
Right.
of an eye. Um,
I think that's what's happening. Everything,
yeah,
it's like you're taking a clip from some video and speeding it up. We are suddenly seeing our lives transformed very fast. Many of us are living under circumstances we couldn't have imagined, 2 months
like
ago.
alone with a toddler all the time.
Exactly, exactly. And by the way, not the least of the crazy failure of this system was not to have any mechanism to handle any of this. It's as if it's as if we didn't know about pandemics and viruses. Viruses have been affecting the human race from day one. They're part of nature. We've had bad viruses before. I think in 1918, we had an exhausted economy. It was exhausted for a particular reason. That was called World War One, which was fought from 1914 to 1918. And it exhausted a country which had never fought a world war before. Nobody had. And so we had this virus hitting an exhausted, underfed, undernourished, tension ridden, war weary society, and it did unspeakable damage. The Spanish flu, it was called 1918. By the way, it was called Spanish, even though it began in an army base in Kansas, here in the United States.
Yeah.
We didn't have a Trump who could try to blame a country in those days. So we didn't have someone who called it the American flu, the way he calls it the Chinese flu. We didn't have that. We weren't as plagued by people like him then, perhaps. But in 1918, it wiped everybody out. So we should have been prepared. A few years ago, we had MERS and
Well, we were
SARS,
kind of prepared until Trump decided to gut the pandemic response team. I
right?
mean,
That would have helped. But to be fair, not that I feel constrained, but to be fair to Mr. Trump, Mr. Obama didn't do much in this area either. There was no stockpiling of what we needed, no production of what we
when
needed.
was the last time we had a stockpile to prevent infectious disease?
Oh,
Do you know?
I don't think we've ever done that in any kind of adequate way. We have stockpiles for things that capitalists think are important. So, for example, we have enormous
Golf clubs.
no, but oil. We
I'm
stock,
sorry.
just so you know, we stockpile oil. The United States government has built huge underground caverns where we store oil because in the event of a war, we want to be able to move the tanks and the planes and the trucks. So we stockpile some things that we put value on, but human life doesn't seem to be one of them.
Mm, mm, mm. Well, uh, gosh. Where does that leave us for today? I mean, it must be exciting for you as an economist to see this, you know, this enormous shakeup in the economy. Do you,
Yes,
a lot of people in the stream chat are asking, how do we talk to people who, are still believe capitalism is going to save us? And have you seen any evidence? I'm sure you have, just the numbers on your own podcast going up. Have you seen evidence of people sort of, getting hip to the fact that this system isn't working?
absolutely. I mean, I was just telling a friend the other day, I would say three-quarters of the invitations that I get to do a panel discussion or have a debate or something like that, and I'm getting them, even though it's cute these days. They say, we're planning to do this in October or September, but of course, we don't know whether we will be able to be open to do any kind of event. And maybe then it's tentative, or maybe we'll do it electronically if we can't do it in person, and all of that. But here's what the topic is. I'll give you some sample titles. Is there a future for capitalism after the pandemic? Or how will the economy be transformed by the pandemic?
Mm, mm, mm.
Or how is the unspeakable amount of money being pumped into the economy at virtually no cost going to affect the economy? And the answer is big time, just like it did the last time. You know, so people are, yes, they're more and more open to the notion that there's a systemic problem here. It's becoming, let me put it differently, it's becoming harder and harder to attribute everything to something else.
Mm.
I mean, look at this game. We call the cause of the economic crash by something other than capitalism. So in 2000, when capitalism crashed in the spring, we called it the dot-com crisis.
Mm.
Then in 2008, when capitalism crashed again, we called it the subprime mortgage crisis. And now this year, when capitalism crashes again, it's the corona crisis. Okay, I get the game. You always want to blame the trigger, the thing that sets it off.
Mm.
It's as if you said World War One happened because the Archduke Ferdinand of Serbia was assassinated on a country road. Well, yeah, he was, and that sure was the final straw. But you're not really going to blame a war, a world war that never happened before, because some obscure noble was bumped off on a country road. People were bumping off nobles right and left for centuries without a war. You
I
know,
don't I don't think people even have an idea that if you had like a shared prosperity economy, that we might actually have a pandemic but still be okay. And some of this, capitalism, in my estimation, and you can correct me, is actually at the root of how this pandemic got started in the first place.
absolutely. I mean, it's always peculiar what you do and do not blame for anything. China and the United States both maintain what I would call a kind of capitalist system because they hold on to the employer employee way of organizing everything. True, in China, it's the government that plays a very, very large role. And in the United States, the government plays a much smaller role. I get that. But they're both kind of capitalist economies. They are competitors. You can see that because Mr. Trump has been trying to whack the Chinese with tariffs to outcompete them because they were basically outcompeting the United States. So, yeah, it's all about capitalism. And because the Russians, excuse me, because the Chinese understand the Americans are trying to prevent them from becoming number one. And the Americans fear that the Chinese are going to take away from America its position as number one. They both engage in military activities. And one of those is to do research in bio warfare, which
Mm.
is using germs, bacteria, viruses that are deadly as part of their military preparation. So they prepare for war by experimenting with viruses. They do not give the similar resources to protecting us in case their biowarfare research has a leak. There is some evidence that this virus is a leak from something. And who knows? We will never know. A, because it may not be known, and B, because the people who do know will go out of their way to make sure that we don't. But viruses are sometimes the product of human activity. Sometimes they are mutations in nature. We should be prepared for either of them. But capitalism is not only promoting this kind of research, allowing it, funding it, but at the same time, not spending the money because it isn't profitable to stockpile. Let me put it another way. There are people doing research on viruses, very dangerous, because the United States funds them to do that. Those companies make a profit by doing that research under contract to the Department of Defense in Washington.
Mm.
Okay. That same government didn't give anybody the money to stockpile the gloves and the masks and all the rest of it in case the other companies made a mistake, had a leak, did something wrong. It is inexcusable. but it comes out of this system.
Professor Wolff, thank you so much for joining us today. We've had one final question for you that's really
Please.
personal to you. And we do really thank you because putting what is happening to all of us right now globally into some sort of context and giving us a way to understand what the issues are is just so important right now. And I find it actually very hard to access in places other than sort of the independent media in which you
Right.
are a part of. You can find Professor Wolff on YouTube. The show is called Economic Update. You can go to Democracy at Work. There's a bunch of shows there. He's on radio all over the place. He's not hard to find, and we will put his link in the Twitch stream chat. The final question I have for you, as an economist, as yourself, a person we love and we respect, how are you dealing? The question was, how do you keep chipper in times like this? But I don't want to assume that we're chipper and that should even be something that we're striving for.
Well, myself, I am hunkered down with my wife, and also part of the time with my daughter and my son-in-law. And I'm grateful to them. My wife and daughter are both psychotherapists. That's what they do for a living.
Thank
But
God you got two of them there.
yes,
That's great.
but I really mean that. I had learned to have even more. I had a lot of respect for them before, but I have learned more because this is a situation that. Um, Here's what it has done to me personally. It brings up memories, experiences from my childhood that I thought were long behind me, but they weren't. That being cooped up, having run away from my normal apartment to be safer in a place that was away from New York City immediately, which is what we did, purely out of fear. I mean, no other reason. Um, Puts me in the position of quote unquote a refugee. I'm not, I was born in America, so I'm not a refugee from the United States. I'm still here in my country of origin, but my parents were refugees. My mother was German, my father was French, and they ran away from Europe because of World War II and came to the United States where I was born. I am in a peculiar way, thanks to my wife and daughter, I have had a rough time because I somehow went back to the memories I must have developed as a very little child, hearing my grandmother, my mother, and my father tell the scary stories of running for their lives. Many of their relatives didn't make it, died, some of them under horrible circumstances in the years leading up to the war and during the war. And, I thought that those were behind me. That's a bit naive on my part. What happens to you in childhood, we now know stays with you. You can work through it, yes, but it doesn't leave, even if you do. And I hadn't done it. And I am now forced to do it because I'm literally living through it, which makes me hard to live with for other people. We've had to struggle through that. And it's been moments of real tension and difficulty. And my imagination tells me that in their own unique ways, every couple, every few people living together, every set of parents and children are being asked to make really difficult adjustments, whose long term effects we will discover in the years ahead. But they will be intense. I'm very clear about that. And it makes me angry because knowing this, which shouldn't have been hard to anticipate, is one more reason that there should have been the preparation for handling this. We know what pandemics are. We know that the big problem is spreading infection from one of us to the other. We know there has to be social distancing. We even know about masks and gloves because we've used them in the past. That's why people knew about it. To not be ready, I mean, it's as if you were a family in a very cold climate and the only way to keep warm was a wood stove that you had, but you neglected to collect the wood. Uh, or, at
Thinking,
least
hey, when is it going to snow?
exactly.
Professor Wolff, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think that is what other people are experiencing as well. Once there's a still point, all of the childhood triggers tend to come up. Thank you.
Right.
So I really appreciate you sharing that and you being a regular part of our show here on ACT TV. And you really, I think you know this already, but you are a very important part of the voice of progressivism and the left here in the US and across the world. And I'm glad you have two therapists with you because we need you to sing. We need you. But you know, we
Juliana,
also
no,
appreciate
it
your
is.
humanness.
You're very kind. I really do appreciate it. But let me close by, in a way, saying the same to you. Never in the history of this country has it been more important than now to have independent, free, non intimidated people speaking to one another through the media at a time of social crisis, the likes of which the country has probably never seen, or at least not for a century, which is a long time. And likewise, a time when most of the media has been captured by big capitalist corporations who run them the way capitalism runs everything else, which, in my humble opinion, is a disaster. Having a few people like you and others like you opening the airwaves so that other kinds of analysis get out there could not be a more valuable contribution at this time. So
Thank
thank
you
you for
so
the
much,
nice words,
Professor
but wow, what you're doing is
Beckett.
very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we'll talk to you soon. I'm looking forward to it. We've been speaking with Professor Richard Wolff. You can follow him on Twitter at Prof. Wolff, Prof. Wolff. Also, find him on YouTube at Democracy at Work. If you are watching us on YouTube here at ACT TV, we ask that you subscribe and tell your friends about us here on ACT TV. If you're watching on Facebook, stay tuned because Heather McGee from Demos is coming up next. So thank you, Professor Wolff.
Bye
We'll see
bye,
you next
Juliana.
time.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye. Thank you.